Tips to improve your flat lay food photography. What's up YouTube, and welcome back to my channel. On this channel we talk about everything to do with food photography. If that interests you, click subscribe down below for some more videos. Today's video is going to be all about how to improve your flat lay food photography. So I'm sure you've seen food photography done as a flat lay. So that's a camera held 180 degrees above the scene. These flat lays are everywhere. You cannot scroll past Instagram for more than 3 minutes without seeing a flat lay of something. Product, food, anything. As they are becoming increasingly popular, it's getting more and more important on knowing exactly how to take the perfect flat lay. I have done a video on flat lay food photography before, which had some really great beginner tips. So if you're new to the flat lay, you can check out this video first, or if you wanted to, you can go ahead and carry on watching this one, and I'll leave the link to the first video in the description for you to watch later. As I go through some of the tips for flat lay photography, I'll also show you behind the scenes of a flat lay shoot I did, so you can see me in action as I demonstrate some of these tips for you. My first tip, and I did mention it a little bit in my previous video, think about what is facing your camera. Absolutely anything can be photographed as a flat lay, or pretty much anything. All we've got to consider is exactly what part of the subject is facing the camera. Don't be afraid to change up your subject to make it more suitable for a flat lay. For instance, let's take a big cake. It's going to look great as a straight on shoot, so kind of in line with your subject and facing it, but if you did it as a flat lay, it's going to just look like a very well decorated circle. However, if you chop that cake into slices and lay a few slices out, that's going to work perfectly as a flat lay, yet if it was straight on, not so much. So when taking our flat lay, really consider exactly what is facing the subject, and don't be afraid to cut up your subject if it's going to work better. Tip number 2, and this one is so important with flat lays, and that is to add layers. Just because it's called a flat lay doesn't mean to say that your image needs to look flat or 2D. Adding layers into the scene can give it some depth and interest, and it can make it feel a lot more 3D. The way we add layers is by adding props or ingredients on top or underneath our subject to give it that height. It's also a great way to frame your hero and make it jump out and stand out from the scene, which is quite important with flat lays because sometimes they can be a bit distracting. A layer can be anything from the plate or chopping board your subject is sat on to a sprinkle of salt on top. What I normally recommend is at least 3 layers around your hero to really give it some depth and a 3D feel. So here in this photograph, I start with a cooling rack and then some nice textured scrumpled up parchment paper. Then I have my subject, and then I have a nice drizzle of chocolate on top just to top it with that final layer. Tip number 3, and that is to use a negative or empty space in your image. I'm not saying this needs to be something you need to consider in every single image. Some images will always look better close up or full, but just taking a step back and giving that scene room to breathe can really improve some flat lays. Negative space doesn't have to be thought of as empty or boring. It can actually be an object itself. It's a really great way of evening out images and making them feel a lot more balanced, and creating some really nice, simple, minimalistic shots that will stand out from all the other flat lays. Another great thing about leaving some empty space is it gives room for text, which is going to be a really important thing to remember if you start working with brands. Tip number 4, and that is your colour scheme. It's always best to keep it quite simple with flat lays because you've got a whole scene and a lot going on in there. Bright or mixed colours can sometimes be quite distracting. I usually recommend keeping to about 2 to 3 different colours in a scene and tend to stick to the more neutral colours as well. This is going to help the different textures and shapes going on in your flat lay stand out, and another way to create this really nice minimalistic flat lays. Again, not saying that there's anything wrong with the really bright, vibrant flat lays that you see. Everybody has their own taste. I'm just giving you a few of my favourite tips and the things I think about when I'm creating my flat lays. Tip number 5, and that is to have some of your subject or props going outside of the scene. This is a great way to add some visual narrative to your image, and adding a bit of that story is going to make people wonder what's going on outside of the scene. With this shot, probably just a lot of mess, but nobody needs to know the truth. So having some of your subject or props coming out of the scene is going to make it feel like the scene as a whole is actually a lot bigger than it is, which is going to add interest to your image and make people look at it and wonder. The longer someone looks at your image, the more chance they are going to remember it, and making people remember your images is one of the best things about photography. Tip number 6, and that is to experiment with aperture. 9 times out of 10 when I'm doing a flat lay, I will shoot at an aperture f7 to f11. That is going to make sure that my whole scene is in focus. All the different levels in the image are nice and sharp, and this is usually standard for flat lays. Usually when we're doing a flat lay, we want to make sure everything is in focus. You don't want the things hanging around at the sides to look a bit blurry. However, occasionally it's quite fun to play with the height in the flat lay and the aperture, just to create something a little bit different and fun. In this image here, I used a much smaller f number or a wider aperture, and I added some height to the serial bars just to give some really nice blur to the background and make that one serial bar really stand out and make something a little bit different. It can also be used to create more interesting creative shots like this one. So that is it for this week's video, guys. I hope you found it interesting and useful. I would love to see some flat lays that you guys create, so tag me on Instagram at amphotographyuk and I'll definitely take a look. Thanks so much for watching, guys, and I'll see you in next week's video. Bye!